Points. The first one, I guess, it's coming out of the very last comments from Mark from Difford. And it's also informed by the previous session with the young lady from Peru who was talking about unsolicited bids and dealing with projects where private sector can go in to redeem their tax obligations to build. And it's the point about the engineer and the need for government and public sector to have an independent advisor to help them to assess the quality of what they're getting. And I didn't hear that being discussed at all. The importance of having that embedded consultant working with the government to help them see whether they're getting quality for the money. I think that's an important point that needs to come out here as well, to make sure that what they're getting won't fall down because cement was not mixed properly, or they cut back on cement when they were building so that they could save money on the private sector side. So that's the one issue. The other issue that I would have loved to have raised in the earlier session, and I'm wondering if anybody can handle it in this session, it came up yesterday as well, and I know I alluded to it as well in mine, and it's the issue about project preparation. In Philippe's presentation before lunch, he had on one of his slides that project preparation was about 5% of capital cost. But that's generally in developed countries and most other countries. But in Africa, it can add up to 10 to 15%. And a lot of it also has to do with the inability of governments to finance the very first parts of project preparation, and also to get the funding that they need to take the project forward through the next steps, so that in the end the feasibility studies and the pre-feasibility studies that have been done are actually become dated and you have to redo them again, etc. So,
thank you.
Thank you. Rima Das Pradhan Black, advisor to the Minister for Energy and Energy in Somaliland. So actually it's a nice segue to Rosalind's comment, and Mark will be happy because it's this renewable energy that is being funded by DFID. It's a 20 million sterling pound fund, and we've just done the inception phase. And what we've done is built in when bidders come in, there's a built-in technical advisory facility for to provide the engineering experience and so on, and for design and installation and so on. So that's one part of it. But Jeff got me very excited because I have this terrible habit of going and working in separatist states. So like in Baghdad and Kurdistan and in Somaliland and Somalia and so on. And you mentioned that IDA and so on is going to be revisited next year. And in fact, one of the issues that the Minister for Foreign Affairs has asked me to look at is the issue of debt for Somalia and the implications for Somaliland and potential HIPIC financing and so on, what the implications are. So do you have any idea about what's happening in terms of that? Not in terms of Somalia and Somaliland in particular, but in terms of subnational. Yeah.
Okay. Any other question from that side of the room before we move? Oh, yes, one. So let me take another one, then that close the first wave, and then we'll move on.
Thank you. Jeff Turner, working for the African Development Bank as a gender and infrastructure consultant. And I just wanted to join together something that Jeff was saying and something that Mark was saying about this question of impact, equity impact, results impact. I think the session is who's paying, but the question is, what are they paying for, and what they're paying for, in some cases is development impact, and getting better at understanding the social and economic impact of infrastructure. I think is a clear, and it needs to be a clarion call from something of this. Otherwise, we will be back here with lots of funders saying we spent all this money, and what's the change? So I think this, and it's not easy, and I think Jeff's alluded to that. So this understanding the social economic impact of this infrastructure is really quite key.
Okay, so I think you're all welcome to contribute to the answer, but now since Jeff got all of us excited, so why don't you start? And again, there was a specific question on Somali, but then also this point on, what are we paying for? So in terms of social and development growth.
Okay. I almost don't know how to respond. That hasn't been a comment about my speaking engagements. But I think this year with IDA and ADF coming up, it is definitely, I think everyone realizes it's time to rethink the model. This issue of countries that are eligible for IDA, but they're not eligible for IBRD, but they can get Chinese borrowing at something higher. I mean, we're talking about a different composition of countries and sectors, and we need a more open environment that actually addresses issues of the poor. And I would include in that on the subnational. One thing I didn't get to say is that none of the MDBs have an effective way of getting money to the subnational. And when you look at not just low income, you look at middle income countries, that's where the challenge is really going to be in a lot of these regions. Now, having said that, what does it mean for HIPC? I really don't know yet. I think, this is, the negotiations are, I know both the African Bank and the World Bank, I don't know if Jeff knows anything more, are all in rethinking mode and are putting some things together. But the initiation of the negotiations will take all year. It won't finish, at least for the World Bank, until December of next year. So this is the time to either gather, like with the SDGs, and get but this is more money is on the table. So it's kind of a half answer, just saying an opening. On impact, and Jeff Turner on impact, I think that's exactly what I'm saying. I think we've learned a lot over the years on social impact, and if I look at infrastructure development over the course of the bank's history, we moved from a very much bricks and mortar approach in terms of energy engineering to probably in the 1990s with environment and safeguards and social. I mean, we never used to worry about resettlement. Suddenly in 1990, we worried about what was happening to the poor people who were in the right-of-way that we wanted cleared for the contractor. And then we got into corruption. But I think we have to go back on the social side. I think the issue of economic evaluation, and this is the year of Angus Deaton, we start looking at the social impact. And we're talking about inequities now and inequality. And we have to upgrade what it is and how we evaluate. And that came up under I wonder how KDI actually does their thing, but I have doubts. It is a major challenge. But I think that is imperative. If we're talking about infrastructure, we better talk all the way down the line of who's going to benefit.
Before we turn to Rosalind's questions, I think Amadou has a follow-up on this one.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the affordability and debt sustainability, something really that I cannot understand. I've been trying to find a solution. If a country is able to issue an Eurobond, $1 billion, like Ghana did recently, like Angola did recently, at a very high rate, Ghana did at 10.75%, I think 10.75% per year, on I think $1 billion for 15 years. So every year they will pay $101 million for the next 15 years before paying off the loan. If a country can raise that money from private investors, because Eurobond investors are typically private investors, why that same country cannot be eligible for EBRD money or the commercial window of AFDB, which is much cheaper and much long term? For me, it just doesn't add up. I don't know how can we make that reform so that if a country is able, from Goldman Sachs or Citibank, do a Eurobond, raise it so expensively at more than 10%, why the EBRD cannot give that same country that same $1 billion at 2 to 3% for 25 years? I mean, it's just, and many countries are in that situation. They don't get the money from EBRD, but they go out there and raise the Eurobond. So for me, that's a paradox, Yeah.
Anybody has an answer here?
Or we can move to the panel as well.
Or the panel, maybe.
Any thought on this, Jeff or Annalisa?
Well,
Please.
This is actually, as I was kind of mentioning in the presentation, that's an issue that we're kind of grappling with. Why developing countries don't access more funding from the multilateral development banks, both concessional and non-concessional. I mean, there's a first issue about, technical requirements at the moment. I mean, thinking countries like Ghana, they're technically still IDA countries. This is the case of Senegal. So there's no access to IBRD lending. There's a process of graduation, which is a part is around income per capita, but the other is a kind of assessment of credit worthiness. So there's an issue about reforming the graduation process, also about thinking about the impact of increased lending by MDBs. I mean, the fact that MDBs, and I'm talking about the traditional ones, I mean, World Bank, Asian Development Bank, African Development Bank, can lend at such low interest rates is because of the AAA rating. So the fact that they're kind of lending to riskier countries means there might be an implication for the sustainability of the multilateral development banks themselves. I have to say this is, as we speak, we have a program of work on the future of multilateral finance, and this is certainly a kind of an issue we are grappling with at the moment.
Thanks, Annalisa. Going back to Rosalind's questions, I think the one was directed to Mark and how you handle these unsolicited bids. And the other one, please, everybody should chip in because I might chip in myself. You mentioned independent advisor consultants. I tend to look at these things as two different things. One, whether you have an institutionally independent body, and another one, whether you rely on external consultants, because what you get may not be necessarily the same thing. But please, Mark, you want to start on this and then
I'm not sure I can answer on the unsolicited bids question. Maybe somebody else who receives them would be in a better position to say that. But could I comment on the socioeconomic impacts?
Sure.
I think all the safeguards are there, but they've always been very defensive. It's sort of how do we avoid the negative impacts of infrastructure, and maybe we just need to turn that around a little bit more. And so how can you maximise the social benefits from infrastructure? And I've not seen a huge amount that's done on that sort of thing.
And I guess I
please.
take a little issue with that, because
Ah,
I think actually
good.
the biggest change, and it's been a problem, we haven't had much debates among us, Chairman. I actually think one of the biggest changes in infrastructure planning and implementation by engineers, including, is on the social side. I mean, you do road projects like there's discussion of Peru this morning. You do a rural roads project in Peru, you don't just talk about building the road. You also talk about building a company, a local company, to be able to maintain it, or building steps into the mountains to be able to others. I think it's taken time, but the issue of the social safeguards being an issue of compliance as opposed to an issue of enhancing the benefits for the people who are affected by the project is happening. It's perhaps it's not happening enough, I would agree.
Yes, in fact, I was going to turn to you because, but again, others might have views. As Roland said, that the project preparation, this 5% that we saw this morning may be perhaps optimistic or refer to advanced countries where it tends to be a bit higher in perhaps less developed contexts. What is your view on this one?
I mean, there it would depend really on the projects and on the countries, and depending also where do you stop on the project prep. If you're going all the way to design, to detailed design, it's very expensive. But if you're going to a level where you can now utilize the documentation to attract equity investors and strategic investors that are capable of putting their own money and taking it from there, maybe you'll put in less money. But one thing that we find out that was important, and we are trying to push for that in Senegal, is for each project to quickly set up an SPV, like an entity that is dedicated to that particular project, and have maybe somebody from my team or the ministry's team or somebody that is competent enough to be in charge of that SPV and of that project. And also all the studies that the government should do it through that SPV, so that the company will own the studies, so that the company maybe can contribute those studies when it is discussing with other investors and can maybe earn something from those studies. It's not just free. If you spend $10 million on studies and project prep and all of that, even if you are a government, you should be entitled to some equity on the project. You cannot just give it away for free. So, and if you put it in a company already, then you tell to the investors two things. I'm going to open the capital of the company, increase the capital, you come in, you dilute me. I initially own 100%. You put in more equity, and together we go raise debt, do our projects. I get diluted. It's a matter of negotiation. My 10 million maybe studies can give me maybe more than 10%, even if the equity totally required is 100, right? So that's a matter of negotiation. Or that same SPV will now be a shareholder next to the private sector. So in any case, let's not just do studies that you just give away for free. And that SPV will be in charge also of updating the studies and making sure that it's not outdated too quickly. Will have also the sense of urgency because it is capitalized. It needs maybe to make some money. So we'll run and go get investors. And investors have one partner to deal with, not the entire government. So just the SPV project team will face the private sector. Probably you'll save time and save some money.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now we're behind. So, sorry, let me take 2 questions from this side and then 2 from this side, and then we try to... Simon, was that the question or you were signaling something from the iPad? Questions. Okay.
It's 2 slightly random comments, actually, and then a question. I live in a country that nearly became the newest country after South Sudan. That's Scotland. Scotland have made a very deliberate decision not to go for PPIs. They've just opened, I think, the biggest hospital in Western Europe. It was funded publicly. They've deliberately not gone for PPIs. So to be slightly provocative, I wonder whether in some countries in the West, the day of PPIs have gone. So my question is, are we sure we're peddling something that we now believe isn't the best thing to peddle? That's one comment. The other comment is a conversation I had about 4 years ago when I was working in Tanzania, where I was talking to Vodacom, who said to me, did I know, I was currently at that time working for DFID, they said, did I know that the biggest constructor of rural roads in Tanzania was Vodacom? I said, no, I didn't know that. And I just wonder whether there's more we could... So anyway, they're the 2 random comments. My question is just going back to Mark, and it's good to know that the way DFID's evolving, but I just wonder whether we're not playing to our strengths, whether there's some things that donors like DFID can do, there are other things that other people can do. One of the things that Gordon Brown did when I was in Tanzania was he set up a collaboration between DFID and China came in to try and do a large infrastructure project, and DFID was responsible for doing the environmental assessment. And I worry that we sometimes go from one swing of the pendulum to the others, and actually what we need to do is really find our niche, what bilaterals are good at, what research institutes like ODI are good at, what other people are good at, and we just stick to our strengths and then find a better way to collaborate.
Okay. Anything else from this side? Please, Minister. No, okay, but it has to be really 30 seconds. Huh? This is an exception.
I just wanted to make a comment in response to that, and I would direct the gentleman towards the very successful Scottish programme of PPPs, which is still underway, which is actually called non-profit distributing public-private partnerships. So it's not actually the case that Scotland's moved away from using PPPs.
Thank you. Mr. Moore, please. That has to do with Chelsea, this question? Or we're not qualified for that.
So mine are 2. One of them goes to Amadou, and it's just what is the capitalization of the fund? I mean, is there a floor for such a fund to be viable of what capitalization should be? And right now is 100%. Is there intent in the future for it to be diluted so that maybe even Senegalese citizens or others might be able to buy into it? And my second one is the business case methodology. And I want to link that to what Jeff was talking about, that it seems to be so heavy on the business case methodology. And maybe we need to focus on the adaptation of the economic metrics to the social impact too. And that in doing that, we might be able to, projects that initially didn't look bankable, become bankable because we're now taking into, in fact, the social welfare impact of the infrastructure. So that we're not, I was saying to people over lunch that states are not established simply to provide public goods based on economic metrics. There are other metrics that ought to be taken into account when we provide public goods for our citizens.
Thank you. This side of the room? Okay, 1, 2. Sorry, the first 2 that I've seen. Let's see if we have time for that as well.
A question to
Please.
Amadou.
Can you say your name again? Sorry.
Yeah, my name is Mobeen Rafiq.
Yes.
My question is, this hospital project Amadou mentioned, can that be replicated, and would your company be cooperative to replicate this project in other countries? Number one. Number two is, what is your plan for poverty alleviation, and especially poverty alleviation and for employment generation? Would you be encouraging SMEs to set up projects there in Senegal?
Okay, here.
Thank you very much. Andrew from the World Federation of Engineering Organizations. The first comment in your analysis, Jeff, you separated out ICTs, investments in ICT infrastructures, but actually in separate conversations, it's also being facilitated by the ODI. There's a huge emphasis now on data infrastructure within countries for all sorts of reasons. So I was wondering if your analysis broke that down further, and I am going to read your paper. And then a sort of a general comment. The question was raised earlier in the Q&A about the role of government engineers to ensure the quality of infrastructure projects. The most critical part of successful infrastructure projects that have been taking place in this country is the concept of being a good client or an informed client. And often what is happening in a lot of construction projects is that you have a company, consultants come in to represent the client from one company, and consultants come in, to lead the project. So even in the UK, you would outsource the good client, the engineering expertise, to an engineering firm.
But
the question is, what seems to be happening in sub-Saharan Africa because of the shortage of engineers, is that the engineers are always from overseas consultancies. Almost always from overseas consultancies. What effect does that have on infrastructure projects?
Okay. So, please, very, very short, and then that pretty much closes.
Thank you, Richard Carey, and I'm involved at the moment in a project of the African Centre for Economic Transformation, which is looking precisely at the question as to whether African governments, in the face of all these increasing financing streams, are they having a strategic approach? How will they use the various streams of finance? And that relates to a lot of the questions that have come up in this panel now. And in the context of the Sustainable Development Goals and the Accra Agenda for Action, paragraph 9 of the Accra Agenda says that countries should have a sustainable development strategy and a comprehensive national financing framework. And I think if this is taken seriously, then each country is going to have to think all these issues through, how it is using these various forms of finance. And why is it that Ghana is raising $1 billion at 10.75%, and rather than borrowing money from an MDB, even at non-concessional terms, the World Bank is borrowing at the best market rates there are. And so why are countries making these choices? Are they thinking it through, or is it a very political decision that's being made? Thank you.
Okay, so let's now, who wants to take the pendulum? When I was here a couple of years ago, we were discussing PFM reforms. It's interesting, the pendulum theme kept moving back and forth over those 2 days. Are we seeing the same thing here? You want to take that? I'm not sure we do. Well, Simon referred that they were kind of seems to be moving from donors and agencies like ODI that seems to be going perhaps outside their mandate. Perhaps there should be more redefinition what is a core business even for multilaterals and bilaterals. So we seem to be doing perhaps too much of too many things, and from a world in which perhaps we were doing too few things and too little things, and we may not have struck the sort of the right balance here.
Whoa.
Unfortunately, our driver's left. He could have answered that.
I was looking for Einstein. And I think it goes back to, we've had all these conferences. We had the Accra Action Agenda, the Paris Declaration, the Busan or whatever. And And we've had progress in that, but I must say, trying to get people to target where they are is very, very hard. We try to get everything together and very ordered. I just think we're going to spend a lot of time, a lot of wheels, and a lot of international meetings trying to get people to fit in a niche that doesn't necessarily fit. And it's got to be adaptable. Now, I do think at the same time, each institution needs to look carefully at what it can do and what it can't do. And I think for the World Bank and the multilaterals, they really have to distinguish where they're going to focus. And there is a tension now. There's a tension for the World Bank, between a country orientation, where you have a program for the country and everything is fitted to the country's purpose, versus these more global climate change, broader interpretation. And I think getting that balance right is always a challenge. So I'm skeptical of trying to fit that, although Mark might have more of a.
I think I'd go along with that, actually. I think politics change as well, so the politics in this country has changed, so DFID has changed, so our niche changes. It may not be the right niche, but it certainly changed. So, but I agree with you on the MDBs. They've got to perhaps change their focus as well. There's a lot of talk about regional, multi-country infrastructure, and that's incredibly difficult to achieve. And are we set up right for that? Not particularly well.
Amadou, there were three fairly specific questions for you: the capitalization, the methodology for the business class, and then if you can replicate what you've been doing in Senegal, in other places.
Absolutely. On the capitalization, the law provides that it should be $1 billion with cash from the government, from the budget, but also a lot of revenue stream in the future that the sovereign fund can capture, but more importantly, also assets of the government. Mm-hmm. So far, for the last 2 years, we've been able to mobilize in total about $30 million, roughly. But what's important is that the leverage that we are doing with that 30 million. So if we put a billion CFA, like $2 million in a project, easily it can attract maybe $15 million or what have you, like the project that we are working on right now. So we take maybe equity stake of 25%, 15%, 30%, we are on the board, and the rest comes from the private sector on the equity side. And since we structure it well, then it can raise debt from the local banks or development banks, including the regional development bank. So this is one. On the hospital, definitely it can be replicated, and this is the objective. First, to replicate in our hospitals in Senegal, but the mandate also is to be a sort of a regional champion, to go outside. But we are happy to share everything with any other country that want to do the same thing. Yeah. Yeah, on the SMEs, definitely, we are investing in SMEs, and we encourage people to come set up SMEs in Senegal. We can be an anchor investor and help go through the entire process, like we did recently, a small project of $13 million. We put in some money, we structured the whole project, we raised some money from local investors, and 2 investors, one from Germany and one from Spain, to build a pharmaceutical plant, to supply the country with provisions that we imported 100% today from other countries, and it's just water and minerals. We figured that we can produce it locally, and we'll do the groundbreaking by end of November to start building the factory. It took us less than a year when we knew about the project and structuring it, reviewing it, negotiating with banks until financial close. We reached financial close last month. Yeah. For us, we will not get involved in direct to social issues. It will be always through private sector investments to create jobs, to create, let's say, economic growth. This is our mandate, to help the government create jobs, economic growth, by making sure we invest alongside other investors, national or international, and raise debt to execute those projects and hire the people.
Okay. So let us take otherwise. Mr. Moore raised the issue on the social impact and the methodology for that.
The methodology on
the social impact analysis, right?
What seems to be an over-dependence on economic business case,
right,
for projects to be viable when when that's not the only metric to be. I was just linking it to what Jeff,
Right.
what Jeff was saying in terms of equity and affordability.
You want to maybe take it?
I'll just make an intervention here because I raised it, and I think this is really a problem. I think it's not just that. There's financial viability, which, toll roads might go one way. If you did an economic viability and you have the network effects, you might not go with it may have a very different effect, and then you have the social issue. I think the methodologies we have, at least for urban transport, is clear, and there's a lot of writing in it over the last few years, that it is regressive in many ways because of the value of time placed on raising the speed in which you can get through the city. But what you really want to do is improve the access so that you have more connection between jobs and people, have all income levels as well as women, commerce, and whatever. So I think we're looking for new models, but it needs to be very transparent, very upfront about what you're trying to achieve, and then how you achieve it, whether it's investment, land use, pricing, whatever.
And just to add on that, it's very important, on this health project, typically our minimum IRR return is 12%. But on this one, we were getting only 8% based on our own money, no subsidy, nothing. But we still went ahead with the project because we are hoping in the future that we'll get maybe some subsidy or government will give us specific money, free money, where the cost of capital is not taken into account so we can keep doing this kind of project, even if it did not meet our returns requirements initially. But 8% is not bad. We borrow on the market at 7% local rate. So we figured out that it's interesting. And if the government gave us the money, it will be at around 5-6% the cost to the government. Okay. So still, it's a good margin that we're having there. Yeah.
Annalisa, you want to sort of wrap up, taking sort of Richard's point on why countries don't use all this rich menu of options that they seems to have?
I mean, if I can build up in terms of the kind of decisions between international sovereign bonds, MDBs, I mean, of course, countries trying to diversify their own portfolio. They won't go down the route of a single option. I mean, why international sovereign bonds, for instance, compared to a loan from a multilateral development bank? They come at higher size. The amount is much higher. There's no policy conditionality, as I was kind of mentioning before. I tend to say there's, however, a market conditionality, and the example of Ghana is quite illustrative. Thinking about, so to speak, a poor macroeconomic performance also created issues in the evaluation of budget support, and there was also kind of threat to budget support suspension, and international sovereign bonds were considered as an alternative option. Then, of course, the markets kind of integrated that kind of points. Credit rating worsened, interest rate went up. So that's kind of that's one of the options. And if I can build up in terms of options and financing strategies from partner countries, there are countries that can really well articulate priorities. They know what they want in terms of aligned to national priorities. They want to own the different programs. They want speed of delivery. And they're able to kind of use the presence of new actors, such as China, to leverage more on the other donors. And they're quite strategic in the way they play the division of labor. Others might have to kind of accept more. They have kind of less of a leverage. So it's a slightly bit more complicated question than that, taking into account also the geostrategic and strength of the government that can make decisions.
Okay, thank you. Let me just conclude just three very quick thoughts. I thought, again, the first chart that Annalisa showed us with the missing middle actually captures quite a bit of what has been discussed. So it's easy to say there's excess liquidity, interest rate are low. For how long, frankly, we don't really know. We're not very good at predicting when the next crisis is going to hit. But I think it's captured quite a bit, so I can make sure that money really goes where it's needed. The other things, again, going back to one of my pet sort of favorite subjects is institutions. We've heard, for example, from Amadou, how they set up the sovereign wealth fund. Certainly it's a kind of a hybrid, very much hybrid. I'm sure none of us wearing my IFI sort of hat would have recommended, or certainly would have given Amadou kind of long list of caveats on the risk and the
Actually-
certainties,
Actually,
etc.
they did. IMF did the first.
Okay, that's fine.
But
So-
then they became our best friends after 1 year.
Well,
Yeah.
fine, that's good. So again, but the lesson is again, don't, sure, hear what others and consultants have to say, but again, try to figure out a way, don't take too much of a normative or best practice sort of look at things. This is very much a hybrid that seems to be working, combines almost 3 institutions into one with clearly all the right skills. So again, all the best. I hope to hear again from you in the next conference with all your success. Thank you, everybody. Coffee is served.
Thank you.